Her parents, stripped of their rank for some forgotten transgression before she was even born, had perished in a border skirmish years ago, leaving her with no name but the one they whispered like a curse. Elara, the unwanted, the orphan. Hunger was a constant hollow ache in her belly. She survived on scraps, on the half-eaten bread or discarded rind she could steal from the kitchens when cook Katya was not looking. Sometimes, the pity in the older woman's eyes was harder to bear than the hunger itself. Pity was a luxury. Scorn was the currency she understood. A sharp kick connected with her ribs, sending a spray of dirty water from her bucket. Elara gasped, curling into herself as pain, bright and sharp, flared through her side. She didn't have to look up to know who it was. The scent of cloying winter rose perfume and smug satisfaction was unmistakable. "Look at it," Lyra's voice sneered, laced with contempt. "Still grubbing in the filth where it belongs. You missed a spot, Omega." Laughter, light and cruel, followed from Lyra's two companions, Fenna and Serene. They were daughters of high-ranking warriors, their clothes thick with warm fur, their faces flushed with health and malice. Lyra, the Alpha's daughter, was the worst of them all. Her beauty was as sharp and cold as a shard of ice, her heart even colder. Elara gritted her teeth, the taste of blood filling her mouth where she'd bitten her tongue. She refused to give them the satisfaction of her tears. Not here. Not in front of them. She pushed herself back up, her body trembling with the effort of suppressing a sob. Her gaze remained fixed on the floor. Looking at them was an invitation for more pain. "What's the matter, little rat?" Lyra prodded her with the toe of her expensive leather boot. "Cat got your tongue? Or did you finally freeze it off? It is getting awfully cold." The wind howled outside the thick stone walls of the keep, a mournful sound that echoed the emptiness inside Elara's chest. The elders had been muttering for days. The winter was wrong. Too cold, too early, too vicious. They said the spirits were angry. "Leave her, Lyra," Fenna said, a thread of impatience in her tone. "She's not worth the effort. She'll freeze to death soon enough, and then we won't have to look at her pathetic face anymore." Lyra let out a sigh of theatrical boredom. "You're right. It's making me lose my appetite for dinner." She gave Elara's bucket one last kick, sending it clattering across the floor and spilling the last of the filthy water in a wide, dark arc. "Clean that up, and try not to die in here. The smell would be unpleasant." They swept away, their laughter echoing in the vast, empty hall. Elara remained on her hands and knees, shaking, not from the cold, not this time, but from a deep, suppressed rage that had nowhere to go. It was a fire banked so low she could barely feel its warmth, but it was there. A single, stubborn ember refusing to be extinguished. She would not break. She would not let them break her. It was the only thing she had left, the only thing that was truly hers. This stubborn, foolish refusal to shatter completely. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the frigid air stinging her lungs, and reached for the fallen bucket. The wind screamed like a dying animal. It wasn't just a storm anymore. It was a living entity, a ravenous beast of ice and snow that clawed at the keep's walls. The timbers groaned. The very stones seemed to vibrate with the blizzard's fury. Panic, a scent sharper than fear, began to permeate the air of the pack. Alpha Borin, Lyra's father, stood before the hearth, his face a grim mask. He was a hard man, his rule built on strength and tradition, and the traditions were dark and old. When the world turned against them, blood was the only answer. A sacrifice. "The sky wolf is hungry," he boomed, his voice silencing the worried murmurs. The winter comes for us because we have grown weak. We harbor the useless, the broken, the cursed. His eyes, cold and gray as the storm outside, swept the hall. They did not need to search for long. They landed on Alara, who was trying to make herself invisible in a shadowed corner. A collective sigh of relief and grim acceptance rippled through the assembled pack. They had found their scapegoat, the offering. Lyra stood beside her father, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She had likely planted the idea in his head, watered it with whispers of ancient rites and pack purity. It was so simple, so elegant. A way to be rid of the girl she despised and appear pious at the same time. "The Omega," Boren declared, his finger pointing like a verdict. "She is of no lineage. She provides no strength. Her weakness invites this curse upon us. She will be given to the storm, an offering to appease the great wolf." No. The word was a silent scream in Alara's mind. Terror, cold and absolute, seized her. This was not a beating or a night in the ice cellars. This was death. They were going to throw her out into the blizzard to die. Two warriors grabbed her arms, their grips like iron bands. She was too shocked, too frozen with fear to struggle. They dragged her from the hall, her worn boots scuffing against the stones she had just cleaned. No one met her eyes. They looked at the fire, at the floor, at their own hands. They were complicit in her murder, and they would sleep soundly for it. The great doors of the keep groaned open, and the storm lunged inside. A wall of white, a maelstrom of wind and ice that stole her breath and blinded her. It was a physical assault. The wind sliced like claws, instantly numbing her face. "May your spirit find peace in the sky wolf's jaws," Boren intoned, the words a hollow mockery. Then they threw her out. She stumbled and fell, landing hard on the snow-covered ground. The heavy doors boomed shut behind her, the sound of the bolt sliding home a final, deafening seal on her fate. She was alone. The world was nothing but white noise and biting cold. She couldn't see more than a few feet in front of her. The wind tore at her thin clothes, stealing what little warmth she had. Panic gave way to a desperate, primal urge to survive. She couldn't die, not like this. She staggered to her feet, pulling her arms around herself, and began to walk. She didn't know where she was going. Away. Away from the keep, away from the pack that had condemned her. She stumbled through snow that was already knee-deep, her legs screaming with the effort. Every breath was a shard of ice in her lungs. Her fingers and toes were already numb, the first sign of the frost that would claim her. She was dying. She knew it. The anger she had felt earlier was gone, burned away by the sheer, overwhelming force of the cold. All that remained was a small, flickering hope that was fading with every step. She thought she saw a darkness in the swirling white, a shadow against the snow. Rocks, a cliff face, maybe shelter. With the last of her strength, she lurched towards it, her body a dead weight she had to drag through the deepening drifts. She found it. A narrow fissure in the rock, barely wide enough for her to squeeze through. It was a cave. Not deep, but it offered a respite from the direct assault of the wind. She collapsed inside, her body racked with violent shivers. It was still brutally cold, but the wind's teeth were no longer tearing at her skin. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she saw she was not alone. A shape lay in the back of the small cave, a massive form, dark against the stone. At first she thought it was a bear, and a fresh wave of terror washed over her. But then she saw the shape of it, the powerful haunches, the long snout. A wolf. It was the largest wolf she had ever seen, its fur the color of a moonless night. And it was hurt. A dark, ugly gash ran along its flank. The snow beneath it stained a deep, frightening crimson. Its breathing was shallow, ragged. It was dying, just like her. A strange sense of kinship bloomed in her chest. Two creatures, cast out and broken, waiting for death in the heart of a storm. She crawled closer, her own pain forgotten. She wasn't a healer, she was nothing, but she couldn't just watch it die. She reached out a trembling, numb hand. The fur was thick but matted with blood and ice. The wound was deep and it smelled wrong. Not just of blood, but of something cold and corrupt, like rot and winter shadow. Without thinking, she pressed her palm against the wound, trying to staunch the bleeding. It was a foolish, useless gesture. Her hand was freezing, her body failing. What could she possibly do? The moment her skin touched its fur, everything changed. A jolt like lightning shot up her arm. It was not a shock of cold, but of searing, impossible heat. A gasp was torn from her lips as a blinding golden light erupted from her hand, filling the small cave with the brilliance of a midday sun. Pain, excruciating and white-hot, flared on the back of her hand. It felt as if a brand was being pressed into her flesh. She cried out, trying to pull away, but her hand was fused to the wolf's side, the light pouring from her like water from a broken dam. Beneath her palm, she felt the flesh of the great beast stitch itself together. The torn muscle knit, the skin sealed, the corrupt taint of the wound burning away under the onslaught of her light. The wolf's ragged breathing evened out, deepening into a steady, powerful rhythm. Then, as suddenly as it began, the light vanished. The pain in her hand subsided to a fierce, throbbing ache. She slumped forward, utterly spent, her head resting against the wolf's massive side. Her vision swam with black spots. She looked at her hand. Burned onto her skin, glowing with a soft, residual golden light, was a mark. It was intricate and beautiful, a perfect circle depicting a stylized sunburst intertwined with the silhouette of a howling wolf. It pulsed with a gentle warmth that was slowly, miraculously, spreading through her frozen limbs. What was happening to me? The question was a faint whisper in her exhausted mind. Before she could process it, the wolf stirred. It lifted its great head, and two eyes, the color of molten gold, snapped open and fixed on her. There was no animalistic confusion in that gaze. There was intelligence, ancient, powerful, and utterly aware. The air shimmered around the beast. The form of the wolf dissolved like smoke, bones cracking and reforming with a sound that was both gruesome and holy. Where the giant wolf had been, a man now knelt. He was as immense as the wolf had been, broad-shouldered and powerful, his naked skin glowing faintly in the cave's gloom. His hair was a wild mane of black, shot through with silver. His face was all harsh lines and predatory beauty, a face carved from mountain stone and winter storms. And his eyes were the same molten gold, and they were staring at her with an intensity that pinned her in place. He looked from her wide, terrified face to the glowing mark on her hand, which was now pressed against his healed side. A slow, wondering expression crossed his features. It was not a smile, but something deeper, something that held centuries of loneliness and a sudden, shocking flare of hope. His voice, when he spoke, was deep as thunder and soft as falling snow. It resonated not just in her ears, but in her very soul, a vibration that hummed along the new, raw connection between them. "You're her." Alara could only stare, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her who? He reached out, his large, calloused hand impossibly gentle as his fingers brushed against her cheek. The touch was electric. The warmth from the mark on her hand surged through her entire body, meeting his touch with a jolt of recognition. It felt like coming home to a place she'd never known. He leaned closer, his golden eyes searching her face, drinking her in. His scent filled her senses, pine and winter storms and something else, something wild and utterly male. He lowered his head, his lips brushing against the shell of her ear as he whispered a single, possessive, absolute word. Mine. Fear and a bewildering, intoxicating sense of belonging warred within her. Her mind, conditioned by a lifetime of abuse, screamed at her to run, to hide. This was a predator, more dangerous than any she had ever encountered. But her body, her very soul, leaned into his touch. The bond, newly forged and burning on her skin, hummed with a rightness that defied all logic. Who was he? What was this feeling? This man was a stranger, yet she felt she had known him for 1,000 years. His name was Kalen, the Alpha King, the supreme leader of all shifter packs, a being of myth and legend she'd only heard about in hushed stories. And he was looking at her as if she was the most precious thing in the universe. "I've been waiting for you," he murmured, his thumb stroking the curve of her jaw. His touch was a balm on her bruised spirit. "For centuries." Centuries? The thought was incomprehensible. She tried to pull back, her mind reeling. I don't understand," she whispered, her voice hoarse and weak. "You are my mate," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "The other half of my soul. This mark?" He gestured to her hand, his golden eyes softening. "It is the sign of the soul bond. You healed me. You saved me." He had been wounded by shadow magic, he explained, an ambush by an old enemy, a pretender to a forgotten throne who called himself the Shadow King. Kalen had been tracking him, but the poison in the wound was potent, draining his strength, forcing him to his wolf form to conserve what little he had left. He had crawled into this cave to die. And then she had found him, a small, freezing, cast-out girl who held the power of the sun in her hands. "The light, it came from me?" she asked, her voice trembling. It seemed impossible. She was Alara, worthless, powerless. "Yes," Kalen affirmed, his gaze unwavering. "A power you never knew you had. The power of a Luna Queen." Luna Queen. The words were alien. She was an Omega, a servant. The idea was so ludicrous she might have laughed if she wasn't so terrified and overwhelmed. He saw the doubt and fear in her eyes. "You are cold," he stated simply. He pulled the thick, fur-lined cloak he had manifested with his shift and wrapped it around her shivering shoulders. It was heavy and warm, smelling of him. The heat was bliss, sinking deep into her bones, chasing away the last of the life-threatening chill. He gathered her into his arms as if she weighed nothing and cradled her against his bare chest. His body was a furnace. The contact was shocking in its intimacy, yet it felt more natural than anything she had ever known. She should have fought, but she had no strength left. She could only curl into his warmth, her head resting in the hollow of his shoulder. "Rest," he commanded softly. "I have you. No one will ever harm you again." For the first time in her life, she believed it. She felt a profound, impossible sense of safety. The howling of the storm outside seemed distant, a threat that could no longer touch her. In the arms of the Alpha King, with the bond humming between them, Alara closed her eyes and surrendered to the exhaustion. While she slept, a figure struggled back through the snow towards the Blackwood Keep. Lyra had followed Alara's tracks, not out of concern, but out of a spiteful need to see the Omega's frozen corpse for herself. She wanted to witness her final, pathetic end. She had been drawn by the impossible flash of golden light that had illuminated the blizzard. Cautiously, she had crept toward the cave entrance, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and curiosity. What she saw had stolen her breath. She saw the Omega, the worthless scrap of a girl, with the legendary Alpha King. She saw him shift from wolf to man. She saw the glowing mark on Alara's hand, the soul bond. It was a mark of myth, a sign of the highest, most sacred union. The Nothing Girl was fated to be the Luna Queen. A vicious, consuming jealousy clawed at Lyra's throat, choking her. It should have been her. She was the daughter of an alpha. She was beautiful, strong, worthy. Not this filth, this invisible wretch who scrubbed floors. Rage gave way to cunning. Her father's pack was a small, insignificant territory, but the Alpha King? His mate held unimaginable power, a power Alara now possessed, and that power, Lyra realized, was a key. She turned her back on the cave, a new purpose hardening her features. Her father was a fool, content with his small dominion. She wanted more. She knew of the whispers, the rumors of a rising power in the shadows, a king who challenged Kaelin's rule, a Lord Malachor. She would not tell her father what she had seen. Instead, she would send a message to the Shadow King. The Alpha King was wounded, and his new, untrained mate was with him, a perfect target. The location of the Luna Queen in exchange for a place at the right hand of the new supreme ruler. As she battled her way back to the keep, Lyra smiled, the expression a cruel slash in her beautiful face. Alara had always been a stepping stone, a thing to be kicked and used. It seemed her purpose had not changed. It had merely grown in scale. When Alara awoke, it was to the scent of roasting meat. The storm had lessened, and Kaelin was tending a small, smokeless fire just inside the cave entrance. He had found his discarded clothes from before the ambush and was dressed in black leather trousers and a simple tunic that did little to hide the raw power of his frame. He turned as he sensed her stirring. His golden eyes warmed as they met hers. "You are awake." He brought her a piece of cooked rabbit on a flat stone. It was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. She ate ravenously, unashamedly, while he watched her with a tender, possessive satisfaction. "We will leave when you have your strength back," he said. "I will take you home, to the Sunstone Citadel, my home, our home." Our home. The words sent a thrill of hope and fear through her. Could she truly have a home? A place where she belonged? The doubt, ingrained over years of abuse, was a stubborn weed. "I have to hunt again," he said after she had finished. "The shadow poison still lingers. I need more sustenance to purge it completely. I will not be long." He hesitated, a flicker of something, reluctance, worry in his eyes. "Stay inside the cave. Do not leave for any reason." "I will," she promised, clutching the warm fur cloak around her. He leaned down and pressed a soft, chaste kiss to her forehead. "I will be back for you. Always." Then he was gone, a dark shape disappearing into the snow-dusted landscape. The silence in the cave was unnerving. The warmth of the fire and the lingering scent of him were her only comforts. She looked at the mark on her hand. It was no longer glowing, but was a stark, black design against her pale skin, a permanent declaration of what had happened. She traced its lines, the sunburst, the wolf. It was a part of her now. A shadow fell across the cave entrance. Alara looked up, expecting Kaelin. It was not him. Several figures stood silhouetted against the white snow, blocking the light. They were cloaked and hooded, and they moved with an unnatural, silent grace. A cold dread, entirely different from the chill of the storm, washed over her. These were not shifters. They were something else. Something wrong. The air grew heavy, thick with the same corrupt energy she had sensed from Kaelin's wound. Shadow magic. She scrambled back, deeper into the cave, her heart hammering against her ribs. Kaelin! The name was a choked cry. One of the figures stepped forward. He was taller than the others, and an aura of immense, dark power radiated from him. He pulled back his hood, revealing a face that was unnervingly handsome, with pale skin, black hair, and eyes the color of polished jet. A cruel smile touched his lips. The Alpha King is not here to save you, little light. The man, Lord Malachor, said, his voice a silken threat. He left you all alone. But do not worry. You and I have a destiny to fulfill. His soldiers, shadow rock creatures that were more smoke than flesh, surged into the cave. Alara screamed. She threw a hand out, a desperate, instinctual gesture, praying for the light to come again. Nothing happened. The power, her power, was silent, unresponsive, still too new and untamed. They seized her. Their touch was freezing cold, a dead cold that seemed to suck the warmth and life from her. They dragged her from the cave, her nails scraping uselessly against the stone floor. She fought, she kicked, she screamed his name until her throat was raw, but it was no use. They bound her hands and feet with chains of cold, black iron. The moment the metal touched her skin, the warm, humming connection of the bond was choked. A horrific, tearing pain ripped through her soul. It was as if a part of her was being physically torn away. She cried out, a sound of pure agony, and distantly, through the tattered shreds of their connection, she felt an echo of her pain in Kaelin, a roar of pure, untamed fury. He knew she was taken. Malachor looked down at her, his black eyes gleaming with triumph. That's it, he hissed. Feel that agony. That is the sound of a king's heart breaking, and we have only just begun. They dragged her away, leaving the small, empty cave behind. The hope that had bloomed so brightly in her heart was extinguished, plunged into a darkness colder and more terrifying than any winter storm. She was a prisoner, her only connection to her newfound savior, a thread of shared agony. The fortress was a spike of black rock thrusting into a perpetually gray sky, a place where shadows clung like shrouds. It was cold, but it was a damp, creeping cold that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with despair. Alara was chained to a wall in a vast circular chamber, the floor inscribed with a complex and malevolent-looking ritual circle. The cold iron shackles were a constant, agonizing drain. They not only suppressed her own dormant power, but also severed the clarity of the bond with Kaelin. It was still there, a thin, frayed thread of shared pain, but his presence, his strength, was gone. She was terrifyingly alone. the feeling 1,000 times worse now that she knew what it was like not to be. She was worthless again. Worse than worthless. She was a tool. A weapon to be used against the one person who had ever looked at her and seen someone of value. The thought was a fresh stab of pain, sharper than the cold. Lord Malachor entered the chamber, moving with the fluid grace of a stalking predator. He circled her, his black eyes examining her as if she were a curious specimen. Such a fragile vessel for such a potent connection, he mused, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. The fates do have a sense of irony. To bind the mighty Kaelin, the Sunstone King, to a half-starved stray. He stopped in front of her, tilting her chin up with a cold finger. She flinched from his touch. Do you know what this bond is, little light? It is his greatest strength, and I am going to turn it into his greatest weakness. He began to walk the perimeter of the ritual circle, his voice taking on a lecturing, monologuing tone. For centuries, the Alpha Kings have ruled, their power absolute, passed down a single, pure bloodline. But there were other lines, shadow lines, my line. We were cast out, forgotten. But we did not die. We learned new arts. We mastered the powers they feared. He gestured to the circle on the floor. This ritual will not just sever your bond, it will invert it. All the power, all the love, all the loyalty he feels for you will be transformed into a poison that will cripple his soul. I will absorb the energy released, the raw power of a broken soul bond. It will be enough to shatter his defenses and claim his throne. And you, he looked at her, his smile widening, you are the key that unlocks it all. Your death will be the dawn of my new age. Despair washed over Alara in a suffocating wave. She was going to die, and her death would destroy Kaelin. The pack had cast her out to die to save themselves. Now she would die to ruin the one person who had tried to save her. The irony was so cruel, so bitter, it burned like acid in her throat. He will find you, she whispered, the words a desperate prayer. Malachor laughed, a cold, sharp sound. Let him come. He is still weakened by my poison, and now his soul is tearing itself apart with worry for you. He will arrive furious, reckless, and stumble right into my trap. His love for you will be his undoing. Days blurred into a nightmare of cold, pain, and gnawing fear. Malachor's minions brought her stale bread and brackish water, just enough to keep her alive for the ritual. The threat of her bond with Kaelin was a constant thrum of agony. She could feel his frantic, raging search. It was a storm of power sweeping across the land, and it was focused entirely on her. But the world was large, and Malachor's fortress was shielded by dark magic. She was so weak. The self-doubt she had lived with her whole life returned with a vengeance. He had called her his Luna Queen, but she was just Alara. She had no power, no strength. She couldn't even call the light that had saved him once. She had failed him. She was nothing but a liability, a trap sprung around the neck of a king. Lying in the darkness, on the edge of giving up, she closed her eyes and focused on the pain. She followed the thread of agony, the only path she had back to him. She poured all her will, all her desperation, all her nascent, terrified love into that single point of connection. Kaelin. She didn't speak the name. She thought it. She felt it. She pushed it down the frayed line of their bond with the last of her energy. For a moment, there was nothing but the echoing pain. Then, a response. It was not a voice, but a feeling. A surge of raw, possessive power. a wave of incandescent fury that was so strong it made her gasp, and within that storm, a clear, solid thought, projected with all the force of his indomitable will. Hold on. The connection was clearer for a single, breathtaking second. She could feel him. Not just his rage, but his desperation, his fear for her. It mirrored her own. I am coming. The promise was a brand on her soul, more real than the iron chains on her wrists. It was enough. It was everything. Hope, fragile but fierce, rekindled in the darkness of her despair. He was coming. She just had to hold on. The day of the ritual dawned gray and oppressive. Malakor's acolytes dragged her to the center of the circle, chaining her to a black stone altar. The air crackled with gathered power. Malakor stood before her, holding a jagged obsidian dagger. "The celestial alignment is perfect," he said, his black eyes glittering with manic excitement. "It is time to unmake a king." He began to chant in a language of shadow and rust, the symbols on the floor glowing with a sickly purple light. The energy in the room built, a suffocating pressure that squeezed the air from her lungs. The ritual was beginning. The thread of her bond with Kaelin began to fray even further, the pain intensifying to an unbearable shriek. She could feel him, a blazing sun of fury, getting closer. But would he be in time? Malakor raised the obsidian dagger. "Goodbye, little light," he sneered. "Give my regards to Oblivion." As he brought the dagger down, the entire fortress shook. A deafening roar, more wolf than man, shattered the air. The northern wall of the chamber exploded inward in a cataclysm of rock and shadow. Framed in the breach, against the gray sky, stood Kaelin. His eyes were not molten gold anymore. They were blazing infernos of pure, white-hot light. His power rolled off him in palpable waves, a raw, elemental fury that made the very stones tremble. Behind him stood his honor guard, the 100 most elite warriors of his kingdom, their own eyes glowing, their fangs bared. "Malakor!" Kaelin's voice was the sound of an avalanche, a promise of utter annihilation. The battle began instantly. It was not a fight. It was a reaping. Kaelin's warriors tore through Malakor's acolytes like a storm through dead leaves. But Kaelin only had eyes for one person. He moved like a blur, a shadow of righteous fury straight for the altar. Malakor, shocked for only a second, regained his composure. He snarled, abandoning the ritual dagger and meeting Kaelin's charge with a blast of pure shadow energy. "You are too late, old wolf. The bond is already failing. You are weakened." The two kings clashed in the center of the chamber, a maelstrom of light and shadow. Kaelin was stronger, his fury giving him immense power. But Malakor was cunning. He used the environment, the dark energy of the fortress itself, to his advantage. And he was right. The fraying bond was a drain on Kaelin, a wound in his very soul. Alara could only watch, helpless as they fought. She saw Kaelin falter, his hand going to his chest as a wave of pain from their damaged connection washed over him. Malakor seized the opportunity. He drove a spear of solidified shadow deep into Kaelin's shoulder. Kaelin roared in pain and staggered back, falling to one knee. His gaze found Alara's, and in his blazing eyes, she saw not just pain, but a flicker of fear. Fear for her. Seeing him fall, seeing him wounded because of her, something inside Alara broke. The years of pain, the humiliation, the terror, the despair, it all shattered. But what rushed into the void was not defeat. It was rage. A pure, cleansing, triumphant rage. A rage for the girl who was thrown in the snow. A rage for the king who had kneeled to save her. A rage against the shadow that dared to harm him. A soundless scream ripped through her soul, and the world went white. It was not a flash of light this time. It was a nova. A wave of pure, golden, searing power exploded from her body. It was the light of 1,000 suns, the heat of a star's core. The cold iron chains on her wrists and ankles did not break. They sublimated, turning from solid to gas in an instant. The stone altar beneath her cracked and turned to dust. The wave of light slammed into Malicor's shadow creatures, and they dissolved into nothingness, their dying shrieks silenced before they could even begin. The purple runes on the floor were scoured clean, leaving only bare stone. The oppressive, cold magic that permeated the fortress was burned away, replaced by a warmth that felt like life itself. The light receded, coalescing around Alara. She floated an inch off the ground, her thin tunic turned to ash, her body cloaked in an aura of pure, shimmering gold. Her eyes were no longer the frightened gray of a stray. They were twin suns, glowing with a power that dwarfed even Kaelin's. Malicor stared, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. "Impossible," he breathed. You're nothing." Alara looked at him, and her voice, when she spoke, was not her own. It was a chorus, a symphony of ancient power and newfound strength. It rang with the authority of mountains and the certainty of dawn. "I was never nothing," she declared. She looked at Kaelin, still on one knee, staring at her with wide, awestruck eyes. She saw the shadow spear in his shoulder, the dark magic still poisoning him. A fierce, protective love, more powerful than the rage, surged through her. She turned her gaze back to Malicor. She raised a hand, and the golden light gathered around her palm, forming a spear of solid sunlight. "You hurt him," she said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Malicor screamed, throwing up a wall of shadow. It was useless. Her light, the pure essence of life and creation, struck his shield, and it dissolved like mist in the morning sun. The spear of light hit him in the chest. There was no explosion, no sound. He simply unraveled. His shadows were burned away, his form dissipated, and in a silent, terrifying moment, Lord Malicor was reduced to a handful of drifting, lifeless ash. The golden aura around Alara faded. The immense power retreated, sinking back into the deep well within her from which it had sprung. The strength left her legs and she collapsed. But she did not hit the floor. Kaelin was there. He had ripped the shadow spear from his own shoulder and moved faster than she could see. He caught her, gathering her into his strong arms, holding her tight against his chest. The wound in his shoulder was already closing, her light having burned away the last of the poison. He buried his face in her hair, his body trembling with the aftershocks of battle and raw emotion. "Alara," he whispered, his voice thick with awe, relief, and a love so profound it was a physical presence in the air around them. "My brave queen." She looked up at him, her energy spent, but her heart full. The fear was gone. The self-doubt was a distant echo, drowned out by the truth of what she had just done. She was not worthless. She was not a liability. She was a queen, his queen. "I have you," she whispered, echoing the words he had once said to her in a cold, dark cave. He let out a shuddering laugh, a sound of pure joy. "Yes, you do." He lowered his head and kissed her, not a soft press to the forehead, but a deep, passionate kiss that sealed their bond, a kiss that spoke of desperation and salvation, of finding and being found. It was a kiss that promised forever. In that moment, she finally truly accepted it all. The bond, the power, his fierce, unwavering love, and her own worth. She was not just a survivor. She was a force of nature. And she was home. Weeks passed in a blur of healing and discovery. They returned to the Sunstone Citadel, a breathtaking city carved from a sun-drenched mountain, where waterfalls cascaded down crystalline rock and the air was warm and sweet. It was a world away from the grim, gray keep of the Blackwood Pack. Kaelin never left her side. He was her shadow, her shield, her devoted teacher. He helped her understand the power that now resided within her, a power he called the Soul Light, a rare gift of creation and healing that only appeared in a Luna Queen whose heart was completely pure. It was the perfect counter to Malicor's shadow magic. She learned that the bond was a two-way street. She could feel his emotions as clearly as her own. His fierce pride in her, his unending love, his deep, abiding peace now that she was safe. The loneliness that had haunted him for centuries was gone, replaced by a contentment that warmed her to her core. One evening, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the glittering city, she reached up and placed her hand, the hand with the mark of the sun and wolf, against his chest, directly over his heart. "You claimed me," she said softly, her voice steady and sure. "Now I claim you. Kaelin of the Sunstone Citadel, Alpha King, you are mine." As she spoke the words, her mark flared with brilliant golden light. The light flowed from her hand into his chest. He gasped, his golden eyes widening as a new mark burned itself into existence on his skin. It was a mirror of her own, but different. A silver crescent moon entwined with a single bright star. The bond was complete, sealed not by fate alone, but by a conscious, mutual choice. He looked down at the new mark, then back at her, his expression one of profound reverence. "My moon, my stars," he murmured, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "My everything." The day came when she was to be presented to the kingdom. Her old pack, the Blackwood Pack, had been summoned. Alpha Boren and his followers knelt in the great square before the citadel, their faces a mixture of terror and disbelief. Lyra was among them, bound in silver chains, her treachery having been exposed by Kaelin's scouts. Alara stood beside Kaelin on the high balcony, not in a servant's tunic, but in a gown of spun gold that shimmered like her own light. She was no longer a shivering, frightened girl. Her posture was straight, her head held high. She felt the stares of thousands upon her, but for the first time, they were not looks of scorn or pity. They were looks of awe. Kaelin raised his hand, and silence fell over the massive crowd.
"Today we celebrate a new dawn!"
His voice boomed, amplified by his power.
"The shadows that plagued us have been vanquished, not by my hand alone, but by the light of your new queen."
He turned to her, taking her hand and raising it for all to see. The mark of the sun and wolf was a bold declaration on her skin.
"They cast her out. They called her worthless. They left her to die in the cold.
They were blind. They saw a flickering ember and did not recognize the heart of a star." He turned his gaze upon the kneeling Blackwood Pack.
"You threw away your greatest treasure. For your crimes against her, for your weakness and your cruelty, you are stripped of your lands and your titles. You will be scattered, your pack disbanded, a warning to all who would harm the innocent."
His eyes found Lyra.
"For your treason, for consorting with the shadow and betraying your queen, the price is absolute."
His justice was swift, clean, and final. Alara did not flinch. It was not vengeance. It was balance. With the judgment passed, Kalen turned back to the crowd, his expression softening as he looked at Alara. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to the back of it, right over their mark. I present to you Alara of the Sunstone Citadel, she who holds the soul light, my mate, my heart, your Luna Queen. A roar of approval erupted from the tens of thousands gathered below. It was a wave of sound, of acceptance, of joyous welcome. They were cheering for her, for Alara. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of pain or sorrow. They were tears of overwhelming, unbelievable joy. She looked at Kalen, at his handsome face, his golden eyes filled with so much love for her it was breathtaking. She looked at their joined hands, her sun and his moon, a perfect whole. She was no longer the unwanted, the orphan, the ghost haunting the edges of life. She was a queen. She was loved. She was power. She was home. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she would never be cold again.